hearing number 2, formerly known as hearing number 4. I believe I'm in counsel, Mr. Leventhal is going to quarterback this.
Hearing local law, to consider a local law entitled A Local Law to Omit Chapter 30 Ethics and Replacing with New Chapter 30 Ethics.
Mr. Leventhal.
Good evening, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. I am the former chair of the Nassau County Board of Ethics. I currently serve as counsel to that board and to the Board of Ethics of the County of Westchester, the Town of Huntington, the Town of Southampton, the Village of Sag Harbor. I am a hearing officer for JCOPE, the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. That's the agency that replaced the State Ethics Commission. I am co-chair of the Ethics Committee of the State Bar Association's local and state government law section. And I'm a frequent lecturer and author on the subject of government ethics, lecturing annually to the New York State Association of Counties, the Association of Towns in the State of New York, and municipalities throughout the state. But I would like to say that it is a special privilege for me to be tonight, for the first time, addressing the board of my hometown. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity.
I have to tell you, Mr. Leventhal, I was aware that, I think I said, you know, how eminent you are in the field. I wasn't aware of how extensive that was. That was a pretty impressive resume.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Supervisor, logic and experience tell us that the vast majority of government officers and employees, like the vast majority of people, are honest and truly wish to do the right thing and will do the right thing if they're helped to understand what their obligations are. So the primary purpose of a local government ethics program is not to seek out evildoers and bring them to justice. There are other government agencies that have that job, primarily the District Attorney's Office and other prosecutorial agencies. The primary purpose of a local government ethics program is to prevent ethics violations before they occur. This is done through a variety of means, but there are two principal goals of a local government ethics program. The first is to guide and protect honest government officials and to help them stay out of trouble by understanding where the lines are drawn. And the second is to inspire public confidence in government by ensuring not only the reality of integrity, but also the appearance of integrity in government. The way we implement those goals is through an ethics program that should have three major components. The first component is a clear and comprehensive code of conduct. The second is reasonable disclosure requirements. And the third is effective enforcement or administration of the ethics program. I believe that the code of ethics that is proposed and before the board tonight accomplishes those purposes. And I'd just like to briefly tell the board how it came to be, what the methodology was in drafting it. I was engaged about a year ago to assist the Town of Huntington in drafting a new code of ethics. And the proposal before the board tonight is almost identical to the code of ethics adopted by the Town of Huntington less than a year ago. I had three primary sources that I drew from in drafting the code. The first is Article 18 of the New York General Municipal Law. Article 18 of the General Municipal Law is a code of conduct that applies to every municipality in the state, with the exception of the City of New York, which gets a special pass because it has its own very comprehensive ethics program. But it applies to every county, every city, every town, every village, and every special district in the state of New York. So the starting point for any discussion of government ethics in New York is Article 18 of the General Municipal Law. And one flaw, in my opinion, that is common in local government ethics codes is that they do not incorporate all of the requirements of Article 18 of the General Municipal Law. The problem that that leads to is unsuspecting officers and employees of the town who look to the local code of ethics for the rules of conduct may be misled because they will not see a provision that is applicable to them through Article 18. So the first thing that I did in drafting this code was incorporate all of the requirements of the state law, all of which apply in the town of Oyster Bay. The second source was the New York State Comptroller's Model Code of Ethics, which is a useful tool. And terms from that model code were incorporated in the code that's before you tonight. And finally, there is the literature in the field of government ethics that has been developed over the past 10 or 20 years. One of the primary authors in this field is a colleague of mine by the name of Mark Davies, who recently retired as the executive director of the New York City Conflict of Interest Board. Before that, he was the executive director of the Temporary State Commission on Local Government Ethics, the only state agency that was ever charged with overseeing local government ethics. So Professor Davies is a prolific writer in this area. He's written some very useful articles with model code provisions, and I consulted those articles and incorporated many of those terms. So those were the primary sources that I drew from. The code before you has, I think, two virtues. One is its organization. It's divided into 3 distinct articles. The first is a code of conduct that sets forth the rules of the road. The second article deals with disclosure. And as you'll hear, there are 3 types of disclosures that are required by the ethics code. The first is transactional disclosure. That is the disclosure that one makes when one is confronted with a conflict of interest and one recuses himself or herself. A disclosure accompanies that recusal. That's transactional disclosure. The second is applicant disclosure in land use applications. Applicants in land use applications must disclose the identity of any municipal officer or employee who has an interest in the applicant. And the third type of disclosure is annual financial disclosure. Now, before I proceed, let me just say that this board has already adopted a cutting-edge financial disclosure requirement. This town is a leader in the state of New York when it comes to the requirements of financial disclosure, because Oyster Bay has incorporated in its disclosure form the reforms adopted by the state of New York in response to some of the highly publicized scandals that occurred in Albany. And in particular, it requires the disclosure of clients and customers, of officers and employees of the town who are doing business with the town. That disclosure requirement appears in the code of the town of Oyster Bay and on its disclosure form, and that makes this town a leader in the field. So the third article of the proposed Code of Ethics deals with the administration of the program, primarily the Board of Ethics. And it is a dramatic advance in terms of the structure and function of the Board of Ethics. For one thing, for the first time ever in the history of the town, the members of the Board of Ethics will have fixed, staggered terms, rather than serving at the pleasure of the appointing authority. That gives the Board of Ethics a measure of independence independence which the board needs for its credibility. Also for the credibility of the board, for the first time ever in the history of this town, there will be a requirement that the board have bipartisan composition. And finally, for the first time, the Code of Ethics will authorize the Board of Ethics to actually impose penalties for violations of the Code of Ethics, other than the one violation that the board already has the authority to penalize, and that is violations of the financial disclosure law. But now there is a whole range of penalties that can be imposed, including fines of up to $10,000 for other violations of the Code of Ethics. Now, finally, the code has the virtue of being written in language that I believe is clear and understandable, rather than the type of language that was used in previous eras, including the era in which the previous Code of Ethics was adopted. Article 18 was adopted in the mid-1960s. In the mid-1970s, the town of Oyster Bay adopted its Code of Ethics. It was amended to a limited degree in the 1980s and again in 1990 to incorporate a financial disclosure requirement. But it's been many years since there was any meaningful amendment or revision to the Code of Ethics, and that's what we have attempted to accomplish here. Now, if the board wishes, I'd be happy to walk through the proposed code, but I'd like to just add one other thing. I think that adopting a new Code of Ethics is really step number one in developing a whole new, modern, efficient, energetic ethics program. Step number two, I believe, is to prepare a plain language guide. Because if our goal is, as I believe it to be, to help prevent ethics violations before they occur, the best way to do that, the only way to do that, is to help officers and employees to understand what their obligations are. And a Code of Ethics that's written by lawyers and to be understood by lawyers isn't helpful to most people. I would not recommend curling up with Article 18 of the General Municipal Law on a cold winter night for an evening's entertainment. It's like reading the Internal Revenue Code. So I think a great service to the officers and employees of this town is to develop what we've done in the County of Nassau and also in the Town of Huntington, and that's develop a conflict of interest booklet that can be distributed to the officers and employees. And this booklet begins with a plain language guide. It's just 2 pages long, it's written in very simple terms, and it's followed by most, not all, but most of the Code of Ethics itself, because the code, of course, is the law. The plain language guide is just that, a guide to the law. So this is a booklet that can be distributed to the workforce. It can be placed in the orientation folder of new hires, and it's a useful tool. It also is an aid to the Board of Ethics when it answers questions about the code. And it can be used for that purpose as well.
In the likelihood that the board adopts the code or some form of it after tonight, are you able to prepare that plain language guide?
Yes, yes, yes. I hate to tell you how few billable hours that will take. It can be done very quickly and easily.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yes. I'll just run through a few highlights of the code, if you wish. One interesting feature is that it introduces some obligations on the part of contractors of the town Town contractors are prohibited from using their position to gain undue influence and undue advantages with the town. Town contractors are also prohibited from inducing. It's a violation of this code for a town contractor to induce a town officer or employee to violate the code. The code of conduct begins with a prohibition against using one's town office for personal gain, and that or to benefit himself or herself or other people closely related, either through a familial relationship or through a business relationship. And so there's a prohibition against using your town position to secure a benefit for a customer who has done more than $5,000 worth of business with you in the past 24 months. It's another major reform and major modernization of the Code of Ethics. The code goes on to incorporate the centerpiece of Article 18, which is a prohibition against prohibited interests in contracts with the municipality. And simply stated, what that means is you can, if you're an officer or employee of the town, you cannot have an interest, generally meaning a financial interest, in a contract over which you have control, either individually or as a member of a board. There is a recusal requirement, and the code makes clear what recusal means. A recusal is not the same thing as an abstention. An abstention, as you all know, means I have just participated in the discussion, I have deliberated, I have exchanged ideas with my fellow board members, and now it comes time to vote. And I just don't feel that I'm prepared to vote. Maybe it's because I don't feel we have enough information. Maybe I'm not happy with one issue or another. I'm not prepared to vote. Recusal is different. When you recuse yourself in the face of a conflict of interest, what you do is you remove yourself entirely from the deliberations, the discussions, or the vote, and the vote, I should say. And this code makes clear that that is what we mean by recusal. There are certain exceptions. For example, every member of the board, when this board votes to approve the town budget, has some interest in what that budget contains. That is not a conflict that is prohibited by the code, because there's no other body that would have the legal authority to adopt the budget. The budget could not be adopted if it were not for that fact. So that's an example of an exception. Uncompensated participation in advocacy by elected officials is not prohibited by the code, even if it involves matters that might come before the board, because that is what elected officials do, that's what they're expected to do, and that's not prohibited. So there are exceptions. There is a prohibition against investments that conflict with official duties and private employment. This code incorporates common law principles. Those are principles that have been developed in cases decided by judges that have determined what the standard is for holding two public offices, or a public office and a position of outside employment. And it clearly sets forth those standards, generally having to do with the compatibility of the two offices. You can't be your own boss. The classic example of incompatible positions is chief financial officer and auditor. You can see how those two positions are inherently incompatible. There's a rule against feathering one's nest, using your official position to obtain future employment with someone doing business with the town. There are rules. The current code only has one post-employment restriction, and that is that if you have handled some matter in a material way, you cannot handle that same matter on behalf of a private sector employer. If it has your fingerprints on it as an elected official in some meaningful way, you can't go on the other side and come back the next day representing the private sector applicant or employer. There's also and that's a permanent ban. There's also a temporary ban now in the code, in the proposed code, I should say, that eliminates the revolving door. There is a period of time, there's a 1-year period of time after you leave town employment in which, if this code is adopted, officers and employees would not be able to represent private sector parties, private parties rather, before their own board or agency.
You say represent, you mean otherwise be involved with as well. So represent talks to me in terms of, attorney first.
Yes, the term that I should have used was, I should have spoken in terms of appearances. The revolving door involves appearances before the board, before the town rather. And the word appearance is broadly defined. It means basically communicate with the town. Use of town resources, there are some very reasonable rules about making personal use of town resources. It should not be a violation of the ethics code for a town employee to use the town phone to call and arrange babysitting or daycare for a child when they're going to be working late. If stopping on your way home for a quart of milk should not be an ethics violation if you're returning home in a town vehicle. But other personal uses of town resources should be prohibited and are prohibited by this code. Nepotism. We live in a post-feminist world. It is understandable that two members of a household might both have employment, might both know the same circle of contacts, and might even find themselves employed by the same municipality, in this case the town of Oyster Bay. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem arises when one member of the family has the ability to hire or fire or supervise another. And by that, by supervise, I mean directly supervise. Provided that the superior spouse, and I mean that only in the employment sense of the word, doesn't exercise any authority over the subordinate spouse, that should not be and is not a violation of the code. But the opposite set of facts would be. Political solicitations of subordinates is prohibited. To use your government position to either reward or punish a subordinate for either engaging in some political act or refraining from engaging in a political act would be a violation of this code, as would personal use or disclosure of confidential information. Here's another area in which this code not only is a dramatic improvement over the prior code, but also is a dramatic improvement over state law. The rule against gifts, soliciting or accepting gifts, that appears in Article 18 of the New York General Municipal Law is a terrible rule. It's very vague. It's very unclear. This code is far more clear. You may not solicit a gift of any amount from a person who has done business with the town in the past 2 years. The reason for that absolute prohibition is that if you're going to ask for the gift, then you should make sure that that is not someone who has done business with the town. The rule against accepting gifts is a little bit different. You may not accept a gift, that is a gift where you have not asked for it. You may not accept a gift from someone you know or have reason to know has done business with the town during that period of time. So that's a much clearer standard than the one that is currently in the state law. Inducement of others, as I said earlier, in the context of independent contractors, but also in the context of officers or employees of the town, is prohibited. I spoke already briefly about disclosure and about some of the dramatic changes that have been made in the role of the Board of Ethics. I would like to just finish, I think, before I answer any questions that the board may have. I'd like to just finish by saying, really, we should think of the ethics program as a program of education. So the Board of Ethics should be involved in assisting this board in getting the message out, in developing training materials and training programs, in making itself available to answer questions, render advisory opinions. Now, another important concept when it comes to advisory opinions in the area of ethics is that they are confidential, and they should be confidential. Why? The reason is that if people's ethics inquiries, if their request for advice is not confidential, they won't seek advice. And we want them to seek advice. We want them to know what their obligations are, so that, because we believe them to be honest, and we want to educate them and help them to know what their obligations are. So I'm sorry I've violated the rule on time limitation, but I'd be glad to answer any questions that any member of the board may have.
Just have a question. If you could just give me an example or clarify that. Something like a town contract. I just need some sort of example to understand it better. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Right. If I am an engineering firm, and I don't mean to pick on engineering firms, I'm only using that as a hypothetical example. But if I'm an engineering firm providing services to the town, and I also have private clients who have applications before the town, I shouldn't use the access that I have to town officers and employees to advance the interests of my other private clients. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Before you go, Lacey, I'm not really sure how to say this without sounding corny or mean. I've been sitting on this board for, I guess, close to 30 years now. I don't think I've seen a finer, clearer presentation than I just heard. We were all pretty silent through it, as you can tell. I would just like to know from you, are you going to be available to us as an ongoing resource? Because it certainly seems to me that the implementation of this is a lot more than the Board of Ethics been meeting and, okay, everybody send their complaints and here we are. I think the communication, what has to go out into the workplace, what the men and women who are town officials, town employees, as the case may be, the degree to which they must be informed, all of us, starting with this town board right down the line, seems to be pretty extensive. And we might not always know how to go about doing that. You just can't give everybody a copy of the code and say, read this. I'm thinking that, yes, you have the pamphlet, which I think is very helpful. I'm thinking that there may need to be seminars, which have to be conducted perhaps by someone like yourself, and then whatever other methods there are of creating awareness. I would like to know that you're going to continue to be available to us.
I would be honored.
Even though you are the draftsman. I'm not asking that from a business standpoint. I know but even though you were the draftsman of the code, that wouldn't preclude you from doing anything or continuing to work on it.
It would not.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a good thing to know.
Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Leventhal?
No, I just want to comment, I do agree with you on the education portion. I think that it's totally lacking, and I think that'd be a great help.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Hello, I'm Robert Ripp again from Massapequa. Just wanted to say that I agree with Mr. Leventhal that the primary function of the Ethics Board is not to answer complaints but to be used for an advisory board. However, I want to make it clear that the Nassau County District Attorney does not enforce ethics violations. They only enforce crimes. So if a resident has a complaint of ethics violation, it has to go to the board. Financial disclosures, Mr. Leventhal touched on. I agree wholeheartedly with everything he says. The problem here in Oyster Bay is you refuse to provide the financial disclosures to the public. I foiled them, the press, Newsdays foiled them. You don't want to give anybody financial disclosures. Incompatible positions. Step number one, in my opinion, would be disassembling the current ethics board and hiring a new ethics board that can perform the job correctly. I think Mr. Leventhal will agree that the current members of the board, John Nahey, who is involved with the civil service disciplinary hearings, Frank DiStefano, who's a former commissioner of planning and development, John Elrich, who's a town attorney, Leonard Genova, who is not only the town attorney but the deputy town supervisor, and James Preston. I'm really not sure. I know Mr. Preston's an attorney here in Syosset. In my personal opinion, for him to remain on the board with the conflict of interest with everybody else on the board, I just think he deserves to be removed also. I'm at a loss because this board is at your design. I have the resolutions with me. For instance, Mr. Supervisor, you put Mr. Genova up for his position on the ethics board. I don't know what you people are thinking when you do something like that. Over the last period of like a year, all right, I've been coming up here repeatedly because, in my personal opinion, you have rules, you make rules, but you don't follow your own rules. Whether it's the same code enforcement people violating rules that they're enforcing, whether it's selective enforcement on your 5-minute rule, who gets to speak as long as you want, you do whatever you want because you don't have any accountability. Over the last year, it's been the most turmoil time in the town of Oyster Bay history. You could have benefited greatly from an ethics board. You've got outside counsel where you're indemnifying people that, in my opinion, you're violating your own town codes. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and there's nobody to tell you or give you guidance because you don't want anybody to give you guidance. I think the first thing that Mr. Leventhal should do, step number one, would be to work on getting some public input on who should be on our ethics board, to have some accountability. And just in closing, I'd just like to say to Mr. Leventhal, I actually have 2 ethics complaints in. One of them is over a year, and I'd like to read a letter from Mr. Leventhal to me. This is dated December 18, 2015. It says, "Dear Mr. Ripp, this is written in my capacity as Councilor of Town of Oyster Bay Ethics Board. To acknowledge your receipt of your letter dated November 23, 2015, addressed to Chairman John D. Nahey. The Board of Ethics will consider the contents of your letter and determine what action, if any, is warranted. You will be advised of the Board's determination. Very truly yours, Steven Leventhal." Mr. Leventhal, I don't believe you have any intention of answering this letter. Thank you for your time.
Robert, thank you very much. As always, we'll take whatever you tell us under advisement.